Let me go to the next slide.
You can go. All right. So glad to be with you this morning. We are talking today in our coffee chat with the DLC about juicy sentences, which is a comprehension strategy that you can use with your students that are multilingual or really any student that you want to dig deeper into text. So just to introduce ourselves, you can go. We are the DLC, and if you're not familiar with us, we connect teachers and leaders to professional learning resources and networks to help improve the outcomes for diverse learners and also increase teacher and leader retention. So our goal today is to unpack the comprehension strategy of juicy sentences and to look at ways to incorporate this strategy into some of our routine instruction. So we're going to kind of go in 4 parts. We're going to talk about what is a juicy sentence, because it's kind of an interesting phrase. We're going to talk about the structure of the strategy and then look at some examples, real life ones that we have a teacher who is using daily and weekly in her classes. And then we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A. So just to kind of clarify what a juicy sentence is, it's a strategy that's developed by Lily Wong Fillmore, and it's used to help students address and access complex text. So this is a semi-organic conversation about the structure of 1 to 2 complex sentences that's taken from a text that students are currently working through. So it's a singular lesson focused on this singular sentence or 2. And it's especially effective when you're working for engaging long-term ELs and complex work. It works for students across all proficiency levels, but it specifically helps those students that may be less engaged or may have some of that residual "I can't do it" feeling. So it's really phenomenal to see those students kind of break apart text and dig deeper into it. It's a practice that we do frequently so that students build the habit, and we want them to continually build that habit of being attentive to language. So just to kind of break down the structure, this is how it works. So first, every day, ideally, you choose a complex passage from a text that you read aloud to students. And I already know that some of you are having questions. When can I do this every day? So we're going to talk about that at the end. But every day we want to think about how we can choose a complex passage from the text, read that aloud to our students, and then you're going to have already broken the sentence into manageable chunks. That's going to facilitate discussion. Then you're going to lead the students in conversations with pre-planned conversation starters. Students are going to write down their ideas, and you're going to write down their ideas about the meaning of each section, and then you're going to discuss each part and how it creates the whole meaning all together when it's all together. And then you'll have students write the meaning of the text in their own words. So you can see this chart that's on the side. It kind of shows how this is a juicy sentence that was broken into chunks. And students could have this chart and this table in front of them to write down their meanings. You could do this whole class. Jessica's going to show us how she's doing it virtually in just a couple minutes. So that's kind of the basic overview. It makes a lot more sense once you see it in action. So stay tuned so that you can kind of process through it with us as we go. One reason it's so effective is it's a small chunk of a lesson that hits all the language domains. So you're having students listen because they're listening to other kids' responses. They're hearing you read the sentence chunks. They're thinking about what each thing might mean. It hits speaking strategies, which is one of the more challenging pieces for students. But as you continue to practice it, they're going to get better. But they're discussing the meaning of sentence chunks, and they're verbally sharing their ideas with whole groups, with partners, with you. They're also reading, of course, as they read independently, and they read in pairs, whole group answers. They read through the sentence multiple times. And then they're also writing to summarize the meaning of the sentence. They're annotating the sentence as they're writing. So it's hitting all of these domains in just one lesson. So it's amazing for that. So now I think we're going to see some examples.
Okay, so a little context. So I teach 5th through 8th grade at Lead Southeast Middle School, and I teach the sheltered ELA classes. So I have like a 5th and 6th grade class and a 7th and 8th grade class. So they're fairly small groups. They're all, the students are 1s and 2s. And, but I learned this strategy at UNA where I worked with Mary from our coach there, Carrie Owen. And I taught 3rd grade, and I taught the ELD class, which was a little bit higher, more like 3s and 4s. And so when I first started this idea, it was like a whole lesson, like a separate thing, like, okay, we're going to do juicy sentence today, and it's going to take like 40 minutes or whatever. But now I've kind of just like integrated it into a whole kind of 3Ls framework for my lesson planning. So it doesn't have to be necessarily a separate thing. That's a good way to practice it. But now I just kind of, whatever text we are in that day in our curriculum, I kind of think about what I'm trying to teach them, what are the targets, and pick a sentence that's already in that text that we've read, and that's going to hit those targets and kind of teach them whatever language structure that I want to teach them, and also whatever like a comprehension strategy or whatever. So so this is what I did last week, or no, I'm going to do it next week. This is for next week's lesson. So they're reading about Thanksgiving. We're doing this Native American unit. And so they're learning about author's opinion. So there's like one text about the first Thanksgiving from the Pilgrim's point of view and one from the Native Americans' point of view. So this sentence that I chose is from the Pilgrim's point of view. And it doesn't actually seem that complex. Like I said, whatever sentence you choose, if you want to spend a lot of time, like you can choose a really complex long sentence or even 2 sentences together. But even just a relatively short sentence like this, you can squeeze as much juice out of it as you have time for, really. So what I normally do virtually is annotate. Whoops. I'm not seeing my Zoom annotations come up. I guess, I probably can't annotate. I'd probably have to be co-host. But anyways, you know how like Zoom annotations, you can change colors, you can highlight, you can circle stuff. So I would start with the sentence that we've already read in the text and ask them questions like, well, first, what do you think this sentence means? They might have some ideas, they might not. Then kind of focus in on chunks of it. Like, okay, what if I crossed out this whole first clause to thank our friends for helping us to survive the first few years? That last part after the comma, is that still a sentence? We had a feast? Yes, it is still a sentence. So you're kind of looking at the different structures of the sentence that way, and how, like, teaching how, if it still has a subject and a predicate, it's a sentence. Well, then who is we? Who's talking here? Who's the author? We is the guy. He's talking about the pilgrims. So then you're connecting pronouns to whatever the antecedent is. And then you can I approach it kind of just going through the W questions, okay, who is it about? What did they do? They had a feast. Why did they have a feast? That's what that whole other clause is for. So then you can get the kids to find out why. Oh, to thank our friends. Who are their friends? Oh, the Native Americans. Well, why are they thanking their friends? What did their friends help them do? And then another thing that I've been working on with my group is just visualizing a sentence and how good readers have to, make pictures. So I think I had it on the lesson without the pictures, and then they can kind of pick out, well, which words in here are things, nouns that you can imagine, and then the pictures come in to help them see that you can imagine what friends are, what it means to survive, what a feast is. So then you have like all these annotations all over the place, and you can do whatever you want with annotations. You can go crazy, or you can just spend like 10 minutes on that. But the whole time you're getting discussion from your students, getting them to make meaning and answer those questions. So then so that's on like my screen share, and then they in their Google Classroom have a separate Google slide presentation that I've made. They each have their own, that's kind of their work that they're doing for the day. And so they have to, I'm going to actually exit presentation mode because usually I'll have it like the first couple slides will have the whole text that we read and they can annotate on those. And then, the third or fourth one will have the juicy sentence. And so you can see the space around, I forget what that's called. You said it, Brooke. It's called like the
margin.
yeah, I think it's, I don't know. There's some other Google slide word. Yeah, just the margin
yeah.
slide. Yes. So they have to, figure out, okay, I'm going to put this in order. Here's the chunking part. But they've already kind of, like I did with the annotation on Zoom, they've already kind of chunked that in our discussion. And so now they can look and see, I see this starts with a capital T. That might be the first one, and they can move it. Oh, my little thing's not coming up. They can move these and manipulate them themselves. And then, they learn to find, here's the period. This must be at the end. But it's tricky if there's two sentences. They have to figure out which one's which. But, okay, and then they can think, who were they thanking? Oh, yeah, they're thanking our friends. That's what we talked about. So they get to manipulate the sentence, and then they can type in the answers to these questions just to review what we talked about and what meaning they made from it. And the cool thing about, that video that I was talking about that taught me how to do this in Google Slides, this background, like you can't move around. It's like an image that is the background. So these are the only movable parts. And I kind of try to add shadows so they can see like, these are the parts we move around. And then sometimes I'll put the pictures on there. They can add the pictures. Here's another one with pictures. This was the same kind of thing. Like we were looking at two texts that it was like one author's point of view was like Columbus Day is great. We should celebrate it. And one point of view was like arguing that we should not celebrate Christopher Columbus. So it was the same kind of thing. They had these chunks and they had to move them around to the right place and add the visualizations and the pictures. And then the last step after that, so we've read the whole text, we've discussed the sentence, they've been able to manipulate the sentence on their own. And then the last step is these differentiated tasks, which can be anything. This is just basic answering questions about that Columbus text and that sentence. You can have them, write a paragraph or write about a character in a fiction text that you read, anything, whatever your task wants to be. And you can differentiate with different like word banks or sentence stems, but they can always on a Google slide presentation go back and look at the text or at the juicy sentence too that they've just manipulated. So sorry, I talked for a long time just then. Are there any questions so far?
I think that's really helpful to see like how you're breaking it apart and how you're using it. And I think you would say that your kids at the end of it have a better, deeper understanding of not just what the meaning is, but also the parts of the sentences that they could look for to build meaning. I like the first one that you had. I'm like going to click on it, but I can't. And how like the clauses were set up, because I think that looks like a simple sentence to us as native speakers. Mm-hmm. But when you think about like all the deep parts that go into it and all the ways that it's built, it is a lot more challenging than we realize. So it's not only helpful for our students, it helps us think through. We talk a lot about at the DLC about like barriers to learning and how even just like one sentence could have potential barriers that we want to break down and look into. So yeah, can you click on, go ahead.
Like I've just found virtually it's harder to have a longer sentence. So I just try to make more with shorter sentences in the virtual world.
That's a great adjustment, I think. And I love being able to see you doing it virtually. We have a lot of example lessons and stuff at the end of this that are linked, but they are all in person. And so I was really glad to see that you could show us how you're doing it, because you're going hybrid next week, I think. But I just wanted to run through this part really fast, and then we can go over if you guys have any other questions for Jessica or about the structure. The next, I feel like the question in everybody's mind, and Jessica, you answered a lot of this, is like, when can I do this? How can I fit this into my instruction? And we were saying, ideally, if it's possible, you can structure your ELD instruction around juicy sentence work. So when you're thinking about attacking a text or going into a text, this is a great place to do it. But if that's not the option for you that you have, intervention groups are perfect for this, and they're great not just for ELA, but for science, for social studies. We want to use them across content areas because kids are accessing, we know the WIDA standards are to access language in all of those subject area domains. And so we want to do that as well. We also, Jessica yesterday was saying, it's in between the text and the task. So maybe you've read the text, then you do a juicy sentence, and then you have a task. So that juicy sentence helps cement your understanding of what the text meant. But you can also preview a text with one, especially when you're introducing vocabulary. So you can be really flexible about how you're doing it, but repetition is key. Doing it frequently, like we said before, you want to be building that habit with students of looking critically at sentence structure, at grammar, at meaning, and asking questions. As you model those, kids are going to start hearing that voice. We're often the voice in their head. So as we model those questions that we ask about them, they're going to turn that into what they're thinking as well when they're reading. If you go to the next slide, when you get the slides or when you have access to them, all of these are links there's video examples for all the way from first grade through secondary school, really fantastic ideas. And then on the right side, we've got a free module from AchievementNet if you want to go a little bit deeper. And then there's an Achieve the Core lesson. And then Lily Wong Fillmore did a presentation on, and she's like the creator of this. So she has a presentation, her slides are linked there. And then the ELL lady, if you're ever familiar with her, she talks about it within the context of a lesson. So you'd want to scroll down to see her part about juicy sentences. So that's a wrap for our slides that we have. But we would love to see you next week when we're talking about using goal matrices, to extend student learning. And that'll be October 30th. And for now, I think we're going to cut the recording and ask some questions or answer some questions. So thank you, Jessica, for sharing your wisdom.